On the outside, it was just a Victorian terraced home, like thousands across the country. But inside, something evil lurked there. It targeted the family, attacked them in their sleep, and didn't stop when they tried to cleanse the house. If anything, it made things worse. This story was sent to me by a listener, and it is truly one of the most unsettling I have ever heard. Because what started as a normal family move for Paul, Samantha, and their 6-month-old baby slowly turned into 2 years of escalating activity that they couldn't escape. And Paul begins this story by saying that it all started back in 2010 when my wife and I decided to move back to England from Scotland. We wanted our 6-month-old daughter to be near her surviving grandparents so she could grow up knowing them. We went down for about 3 days, and in that time we had to find somewhere for us to live, and I had to get a job while Samantha was still on maternity leave. We viewed a few houses, but none of them suited or were in convenient locations. Then we viewed a house in Bourne, Lincolnshire, my home county. On viewing the house, our baby girl kept following something, or someone, with her eyes, smiling and giggling in Samantha's arms the whole way round. And that sealed the deal on the house for us. It just felt like such a fantastic house. It had what you would call good bones. Or so we thought. It was something that we would live to regret. You know, if a story starts like that, it is going to be terrifying. A bit of context on the house itself. It was one of the older builds in the town, being a mid-row Victorian terrace house. It had an indoor toilet and bathroom conversion in what used to be the coal shed with a door into the kitchen. The kitchen then led onto the dining room, and this had an understair pantry, which had all of the original built-in crockery cupboards and shelves. It was basically an old-fashioned larder, what they called a cooling room, which I know about as my nan had lived in a house like this, and in there she would have had all of her meats hanging off the ceiling. Part of this room in this house, though, had been blocked off, and initially we couldn't understand why. They'd turned what had been a pretty good-sized room into a little broom cupboard. I mean, these old Victorian terrace houses aren't known for their space, so if the pantry is blocked off like that, it's got to be a pretty big reason. From there, it led to the stairwell onto the living room, and the front door opened straight into this room. The stairs were typical Victorian style. They were so narrow I could only get my toes and the balls of my feet on them. At the top of the stairs was a tiny landing with the master bedroom to the right and a long corridor to the left. The only light was right at the top of the stairs, and so the rest of the corridor was always naturally dark. Stepping up into the corridor, there was a good-sized bedroom, and at the end was the small bedroom. And later, because of my work, this would become my shift room. The master bedroom again had all of its original fittings, mouldings, and a fireplace. I can actually visualise every single room in this house, as we had a family friend who lived in a Victorian terrace exactly like this when we were younger. That one was supposedly haunted too. Creeped me out as a kid. Not nearly to the extent that Paul, Samantha and their family went through though. After we moved and settled in, everything seemed to be going well for a little while. But then I remember just a couple of weeks in, the feeling changed, and the atmosphere in the house made us both feel uneasy. The first sign that something more was going on was when Samantha went to put our daughter down to sleep, and she was following something around the room with her eyes again. But whatever it was, she was terrified by it this time. If you've ever seen a young baby with fear in their eyes at something that you can't see, it's an unsettling thing. She was hanging onto Samantha, refusing to be put down into her cot. My wife never actually let our daughter sleep in her own room, which was a bedroom down the corridor, because of the feeling of a presence on that landing. It was so bad that she would never even look down the corridor as she didn't want to see what was there. She would keep her head completely turned away so she wouldn't see anything in the corner of her eyes. It just had that feeling that if you looked down there, you would see something you didn't want to see. Even to this day, it makes her feel sick just thinking about it. But in the master bedroom, Samantha would frequently see a deep, dark shadow person standing by the bedroom door at night. Initially, it was just out the corner of her eye, but as time went on, she could actually look at it square in the face and see it standing there. No. Either be a good little freeloader and help with the chores, or leave. Don't just stand there, being all creepy in the corner. One of the first incidents that I had in the house was when I was in the shower one day, in the bathroom that used to be the coal shed, and I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I just had a strong thought: don't look towards the shower curtain. It felt like someone was standing on the other side of it. I'm not easily scared, but I was frozen in fear. I must have just stood there for the good part of an hour. Another time, I returned home from work early one morning and crashed on the couch, something that happened often. Something woke me with a whisper in my ear. It was then that I felt a pressure on my chest and, without sounding crude, a pleasuring in my nether region. I remember seeing a woman wearing a blue Victorian gown with puffed out sleeves, a blue hat, and laced gloves on my chest. The feeling I got was one of pure love. This all took seconds to register, and when it did, she sort of just faded. But although I couldn't see her anymore, I could still feel her presence on me. I can still feel the anguish of her departure and me calling out, "Please don't go." I never said anything to Samantha as I was riddled with guilt and confusion. I mean, yeah, how do you even begin to process what that was? After that encounter though, I always felt that I was watched, especially in the bathroom and kitchen areas. The kitchen window looks directly into the rear passageway of our house, and the feeling of being watched through that window was immense. It really made me uneasy. I hated it. The understairs cupboard, the one that had been partially blocked off, had a really horrible feeling to it. I honestly can't explain the feeling emanating from it, but it actually felt evil. I only went in there once, but just put my arm in and grabbed the hoover and then got straight out. That was it. I wouldn't even step into it. Samantha would frequently get doors shoved against her or have difficulty opening doors as if someone was holding the door shut. Even cupboards, it felt like they had locks on when obviously none of them did. There was one time when I was coming out of the dining room to go across the hallway into the front room, and I remember standing there and I couldn't remember closing that door, but the door was closed. Like the rest of the features of the house, they were old period doors, so they were quite heavy. I turned the handle and went to move it, and it wasn't budging. I just thought to myself, right, okay. I stood and counted to 3, grabbed the handle and pulled it, and with a bit of effort, the door opened up. I was about to step into the front room when my mind thought, don't go in there. Yeah, if something is holding the door shut, that room is probably not somewhere you want to be anyway. Don't want to find out what was holding it shut. You'd find me going the opposite direction anyway. After a few weeks, things took a particularly weird turn. A woman 2 doors down accosted me in the alley between ours and her row of houses. I just got home from a 13-hour shift and wasn't in the best of moods. All I wanted to do was sit down and chill. But this woman, she begged me to help her. I was curt with her, knowing that she was an alcoholic, but also she had a reputation with men in the local area and the violent tendencies that she had towards them. I said, "What do you need help with?" And she retorted with them. Somewhat taken aback, I inquired who, and again she mentioned them, but then added, "them in my fireplace." I just came to the conclusion that she'd taken something again and was on a bender, so I told her effectively to go away and don't bother me again. I didn't take much notice at the time, but knowing now what happened later, maybe I should have. It was strange though that she always made a beeline for our house. She didn't seem to bother anyone else on the street. In between occurrences at our house, she kept popping into the picture. She'd asked Samantha to help her, banging on the windows during the day, harassing visitors with the same request. Once, she knocked on the door at 2 a.m. and I answered it. Again, she asked for help and that they were coming out of the fireplace and pinching her. Again, I was miffed and told her to do one. I didn't add the situations together, what we were experiencing in our house and what she was saying. Maybe I just chose not to. I do understand why Paul reacted the way he did though. At the time it would have been easy to write her off, especially at 2 in the morning and you've got a young baby in the house. But what's really unsettling is that she only went to Paul and Samantha. She didn't bother anybody else on the street. Even though they weren't next door neighbours, there was a house in between them and then the alley and then it was her house. So why out of all of the houses go to them? Things went quiet with her for a while, but after about 6 months into living at the house with this awful atmosphere and strange events going on, we kept on hearing tapping, scratching noise coming from the attic. We ignored it as best we could, but by this point, patience was getting thin on the ground. Neither of us had been up in the attic yet, so it couldn't have been anything that we'd done. disturbing a mouse nest or anything like that. So I made it my mission to go and find the possible bird stuck in the attic, whether it was trapped down a chimney flue or anything like that. Up in the attic, it was a bit eerie up there, as all the attics went straight through. So you could literally walk the length and breadth of the row of 6 terraced houses. I couldn't see any bird at all, but the noise was still happening. Then, a tapping noise attracted my attention to a couple of low beams. I shone my light onto them and noticed that there was a gap between them into another crawl space. My curiosity got the better of me though, and through I went with a tight squeeze, looking for whatever was causing this noise. I put my hand down on what I initially thought was a solid wooden floor, but I ended up going straight through it, and the next thing I know, I'm headfirst through a board that was covering a blocked-off chimney. So I was lodged head down in a chimney flue. And that was quite worrying, as I thought, if I slip anymore, I'm gonna get stuck here. I shouted frantically for Samantha, but she couldn't hear me at all. I had one arm in, one arm out, and it was literally my fingers that were holding me up to that edge. I was a good way up to my waist almost, and I knew that my fingers were right on the fingertips. Fortunately, I was fighting fit at the time and just pushed my shoulders out and then sort of had to hike myself up and caterpillar backwards out of the chimney. One wrong move though, and you would have been stuck down the chimney flue. That is terrifying in itself. Was it just a silly accident? Was there really an animal there, or was I lured? I sat in the opening of the attic, thoroughly miffed that no reason for the noise was found, and that it had almost ended up in an emergency situation. Just as I was lowering myself back out of the attic, the tapping noise started again, in that same place between the 2 low beams. And from then on, it never really went away. The whole ordeal in the attic shook me, but I don't get put off that easy. I'm not easily scared. In the house though, things were tense. My eldest daughter used to stay with us on weekends and holidays, and she slept in the room on the left of the corridor upstairs. She'd complained from the first night that someone was in her room, or she felt watched from her window. Her bedroom window overlooked the passageway at the rear of the house, the same passageway that I had strong, uneasy feelings around. So there was an ongoing discomfort with both my daughters experiencing something unsettling in the house. We'd noticed that small things would go missing and reappear days later too. Silly things like nail clippers or the shed key. I mean, compared to what has been going on, hiding the shed key seems reasonably harmless at this point though, I'd say. Please, ghosts, take the shed key. The shed belongs to the spiders anyway. Samantha had an interest in mediums and spiritualism, so she had a medium come to the house to give her a reading. Only the information was for me. The medium mentioned that the small things going missing, that was my nan, who had been a mischievous woman in life, so that made sense. But the main thing that she said that really stuck in my mind was every night she stood over our baby daughter while she slept because nothing was going to hurt her while she was there, which seemed like a really bizarre thing to be told. She apparently would also stand in the doorway watching soaps with Samantha. Frankly, that is utterly iconic behaviour anyway. Just because you're dead doesn't mean you can't catch up on Coronation Street. For a while, things smoothed out. Most of the tension had disappeared. Our baby girl followed something around that made her smile and laugh again. And I had encounters with something else in the house. On a number of occasions, mainly when I used to crash out on the couch, I would feel something on my legs and look down to see a brief glimpse of a young girl sitting as kids do on my legs, swinging her legs. Multiple times I awoke with the feeling of a child lying on me. Again, I looked down and I saw the girl cuddled into my chest, just a glimpse. One time I felt her presence was there long enough for me to stroke her hair, for probably a good 5 minutes, and another time she looked up and smiled at me. The warmth from that purest of smiles is something I've felt before and after this encounter. And having 2 daughters, I felt fatherly affection for this girl. But then things started to escalate, and I became more targeted by another entity. I'd taken to sleeping in the small bedroom at the end of the corridor by this point, so as to not wake Samantha with my odd working hours. So then, that meant I had to walk down the corridor that nobody would even look down. That corridor had never really bothered me, but then all of a sudden, it did. I used to scoot it down to my room. It's quite comical when I think on it now, but unfortunately it was the corridor I needed to be concerned about. You'd reach the top of the stairs and it wasn't the biggest house in the world, but this corridor just used to seem like it went on forever. like you see in those horror films where the door shrinks into the distance. There was also a cold spot in the middle of it, and when I walked through it, it was like walking through mud, and there was a white noise that accompanied it. I used to try and put it down to working long hours and the disturbed sleep, but thinking back, I'm sure the white noise was voices. I don't know, man. All I'm hearing are just more and more reasons to completely avoid this corridor altogether. I mean, let's be honest. The first night I see a shadow man in the corner of the bedroom, or someone trying to psycho me in the shower, I am out of there. So kudos to putting up with it. But one night, while sleeping in that bedroom, I was awakened to the feeling that I couldn't breathe. It felt like somebody was on my chest again and I was being choked. But there was also a horrible, cold, wet feeling in my nether regions and an awful smell. A smell that can only be described as a dirty, wet dog smell after they've been left to run about in stagnant water. Ooh, all too familiar what that smells like thanks to Ernie's affinity with puddles. The more pond scum on the top of it, the better, you know. This smell made me want to puke. But afterwards, this attack would go on 3 or 4 times a week. I was left with marks around my neck after every encounter. I wasn't the weakest of blokes, but I couldn't even try to get off the bed. I couldn't roll away, it just wasn't having it. I was totally pinned. And so mentally, this started taking a toll on me. When the marks became obvious, that's when I came clean with Samantha about the first encounter and the lady in the blue dress, and the subsequent ones since. She was horrified and told me of more occurrences that she had experienced. Amongst all of these paranormal ongoings, our daughter was still following something that made her smile, but then at night, something that terrified her. One day, Samantha came home, saying that she'd had an interesting conversation with one of the ladies at work. Samantha had mentioned something about the house, and on finding out where we lived, this lady had asked if anything weird had happened in that house. Oh, if someone is asking whether you've had something weird happen, you're absolutely about to get trauma dumped on about what they've experienced in your house, so you probably don't want to know anyway. Samantha just responded with, "What do you mean?" It turned out that the lady had said that she lived in that exact house as a child in the 1970s. She told Samantha that long before that, there had been a young girl who had ended her life in the outside toilet. That same outside toilet and coal shed that this work colleague's father had converted into the bathroom that goes off the kitchen, where I'd first had that unsettling encounter when I'd been in the shower. This woman went on to say that the little girl would come around the house quite often, but she didn't cause them any harm. No malice whatsoever. She also said, "It sounds really stupid, but people used to come out of the airing cupboard, as if it were some kind of portal or something. What it is, I don't know." Coming out of the airing cupboard, you say? Just like the neighbour next door but one has been complaining about. Pieces are all connecting here. But this lady also said that her family had had the house exorcised in the 1970s. There it is. That is a heck of a thing to drop. What do you mean? The house I'm currently living in and having all of these issues with has already been exorcised before. Surely, though, that must have meant that it was more than just the little girl that the family in the 70s was seeing, to go to the lengths of having the house exorcised. I wonder if there was something more going on, whether they were being tormented by whatever it is that's attacking Paul. With everything going on in the house, we had also made the decision that we needed help too. And so we'd called the spiritualist church. A local spiritualist came round with another medium and we asked them to cleanse the house. Samantha first showed them around, but when they were in the kitchen and bathroom areas, both spiritualists heard a voice telling them to get out. After the exorcism had been performed, they told us about the back bedroom where I slept. There was a spirit of a man who had lived in the house with his mother, and that had been his bedroom. He'd been dominated by his mother, and their relationship had been an inappropriate one. Her son was a poacher and would skin and gut rabbits in the kitchen. A smell I'd experienced several times in the house, and one I'd recognised, having been a poacher as a boy. This revelation had Samantha and I looking at each other with the "we're on the right track" acknowledgement. Other entities were mentioned and were very negative, pushing evil. All of the force seemed to be manifesting in the small room I was using. But the reason why my daughters felt safe some of the time was because my nan was still watching over them when she could. It does make me wonder whether that really good feeling we first felt when we viewed the house was my nan. Maybe saying, "Oh, you've moved back home." But when the spiritualists left, one of the women left her phone number with us and told us to call her again if things got bad or we needed any more help. But for a couple of weeks after they'd cleansed the house, everything was fine and we thought the exorcism had achieved its goal. Until things got worse and all hell broke loose. That must have been soul-crushing though. You have a good stretch of a couple of weeks where nothing really happens. Maybe your sleeping pattern starts to come back to normal. Maybe you tentatively start to think, oh, is this it? Have we done it? But then things start happening again and you're just at an utter loss what to do. Just feeling completely powerless in your own home. Just awful. It was almost as if they'd gotten rid of the spirits that were there, but that just made way for new ones to come through, and they were even worse than the previous ones. Once again, most of the activity was directed at me. Samantha felt it first though, a brooding presence. She doesn't scare easily either, but she was showing signs of being so. We started to argue, something we've never done before or since. I had been ground down, too afraid to go to sleep, but the more I got tired, the more it seemed to happen in the small bedroom. Like my guard was down so it could get to me. I was abused whenever it could, and the bruises around my neck would draw attention at work, so covering up prevented awkward questions. The same with our families. Although my mum didn't like coming to the house anyway when she babysat our daughter while Samantha was at work, we grinned and bared it, but it was relentless. You'd walk anywhere in the house and feel something push you from behind. One thing that was never affected by any of this, though, was the cats. We had cats in the house, and normally when you watch paranormal videos, you go, look, the cats aren't reacting. You'll notice that my cats are reacting because they've literally just been fed. To be fair, now when you're looking at ghost videos and animals are reacting, you've got to look for them overreacting. And if they turn themselves inside out unnaturally, it's probably AI nowadays. But our cats, they didn't react at all. They had a few spooky moments where they'd be looking at something, but that was it. My eldest was still scared when she came to visit and would become very withdrawn where Samantha was concerned. One night, when she was staying for the weekend, she came screaming down the stairs. She was absolutely terrified, and it took me over an hour to calm her down to understand what had gone on. It transpired that a black shadow had come out of the wall at her, over her bed, and tried to grab her. Paul's daughter was 9 years old when this happened. I got traumatised by a motion sensor triggering a projection in Tamworth Castle at that age, and I still bark on about that 20 years later. So just imagining witnessing something like that as a child, it's just horrific. I had had enough. I just snapped. I rushed up the stairs into her room in a rage. I told it that assaulting me was one thing, but when it goes for my family, then that's another thing entirely. If you want to take me on, fair, but you are not touching my family. I will kill you even if you are dead. The pressure in that room, weighing down on my chest and shoulders, was extremely threatening. Later on, Samantha found us both asleep down in the living room. Yeah, that is totally fair. I would never set foot again in that room if something like that happened. I certainly wouldn't be sleeping alone. Things continued, so I phoned the spiritualist who had come and cleansed the house to see if there was anything we could do to stop things, only to find out she had died 2 weeks after cleansing our house. She had no known health problems whatsoever, just dropped down dead one day. Maybe we could be reading too much into it, but we were gobsmacked. It's hard not to read too much into things like that though, isn't it? When you're going through this ordeal, it's going to be taking up every ounce of your mental energy. It's like Paul was saying, it grinds you down and you can't sleep, you're weak. It's hard not to connect those dots when that is all that is on your mind, even if it makes you wonder whether you're actually going mad. Things continued in the house, and I remember sitting in the dining room one day and I was building models, which is something I do for my mental health. And we had this huge table. It was like a medieval banquet table. I was sat at one end and I just stopped what I was doing. I was looking at the table, but I could see somebody sat in a chair next to me, an adult shape there in the chair. I just said to them, "Don't you touch this shit, otherwise I'll have you," because nobody touches my models. It didn't feel bad, but it wasn't pleasant. I absolutely love that energy though. Put that ghost in their place. The lady 2 doors away came back into the picture. I'd come in from a very harassed late shift. I'd finished my supper and washed up, and I was leaning against the sink, thinking about the appalling day I'd had and the awful company I worked for. I just got that feeling of being watched again. This time I didn't ignore it and I looked up. There was the woman, staring at me through the kitchen window. Suffice to say, I almost soiled my pants. Yeah, I think that's a natural reaction, feeling someone watching you and then looking up and seeing someone staring at you from the other side of a window. She again was talking about them coming out of the fireplace, and this time the bedroom wall as well. I was equally as curt as I had been in the past, and she left. Time went on when one day I arrived home after a call into work. I was not in the best of moods. I entered the alleyway where there were two women standing at the gate of the woman who had bugged me for a while. They introduced themselves as her sisters, and they asked me if I could scale the gate and unlock it. I apologised and said I'd had a skinful of their sister, to which they smiled and said that they didn't blame me. I carried on along the path home and mentioned it to Samantha, who said that they'd already been around to her before I'd got home. When Samantha had opened the door, she'd initially thought it was that neighbour woman again, as the neighbour and her sister looked eerily similar. So when this sister asked if she'd seen the neighbour, Samantha was just as cold as she had been in the past. On hearing that they'd asked for my help too, though, Samantha went back out to the sisters to see what could happen and explain why I hadn't helped. I do feel guilty about not helping now, but hindsight is a great thing. I'd had enough hassle with her knocking around the house at all hours for the past almost 2 years. Samantha came back after a short while with the news that the woman was dead. She'd been found lying on the bathroom floor downstairs. Well, my mind just went into overload. I knew she'd been experiencing the same as us, but at that point, I just couldn't cope with someone else's paranormal problems. By this time, though, looking for a new house for us had become a priority. Moving down from Scotland in the first place had taken all of our savings, and then we'd had a very poorly cat as well, so the vet bills had taken all of our money at the time. But now we were in the position where we could finally afford to move out. Samantha had said all along that most nights she felt people sitting on the bed when there wasn't anyone there. But shortly before we moved out, one night she was just messing about, checking her phone as you do, and there had been the shadow figure in the corner, as usual. Your definition of usual and mine are vastly different, but this time she felt someone sitting on the end of the bed, and as a knee-jerk reaction, she kicked out and made contact with whatever it was. I'm so sorry, but you did what? She told it that, you've won. We're leaving. You're getting your house back. So just leave us alone and give us peace so that we can get out of here. But that was the first time in the almost 2 years we'd been living at that house where she communicated with whatever was there. As you always hear all of these things about not engaging with them. After that, everything fell into place within a very short time. A new job and a new house all lined up within days. We packed up and left, and I was adamant that I would never go back. We went through 2 years of hell in that house, which we would never want to repeat. Only, I had no choice but to go back, when my CPC licence had been delivered to the old address, as I'd changed it just before moving. I was terrified about going back to that house. I walked through the alleyway leading to the back of the houses and along until I got to the right one. And of course you had the 2 big windows for the back of the house that I had to walk past to get to the back door, and I couldn't look up. I couldn't bring myself to look at them. I kept my eyes down on the doorstep, and I remember banging on the door. A woman opened it, and all I could feel was the draft that came out of that house. It was horrible. I got my letter from her and immediately took off back towards the alley, not taking one more look at the house. A little later on, after we'd settled into our new home, one of the mums at our daughter's primary school said to Samantha that she'd got a house on the street where that house was. But all Samantha could say was, "Please tell me it's not our old one." Luckily it wasn't. It was the house literally dead across the street. Samantha and I helped that family move into their home, but again, when we were walking up the road, we didn't look across the street to our old house. We just, again, couldn't bring ourselves to do it. When I was in the front bedroom putting up cupboards, I just happened to glance over and see the top bedroom window. Straight away, I got a feeling. I know it's psychological, there was nothing there. Perhaps there was someone looking at me, but I just couldn't look any longer. I didn't want to end up drawing something across the road into this house or anything like that. Yeah, I think at that point, what you don't know can't hurt you. It's probably best just not to look. Even like Samantha turning her head straight away so she couldn't see anything out the corner of her eye. Ignorance truly is bliss. During our time living there, the only neighbour who'd ever mentioned anything strange was the woman 2 doors down. The older woman right next door to us, who'd lived there since the 60s or 70s, never did. But the thing was, I already knew that something was going on with that particular street long before that house had even entered the picture. Because I had actually lived on that street before, back in the 80s, in another slightly larger Victorian terrace house, and I had experienced hideous things in there too. I lived with a group of mates who had all come back from work one night, finishing their late shift. When they opened the door, they saw me at the bottom of the stairs with a great big knife saying, "Don't look up the stairs." Now, I'm pretty sure that is how horror movies start. How terrifying for Paul, but also for the mates coming back from work. They asked me why, and I started to tell them what had happened. I'd come home from work at about 8 in the evening and was totally fine. I'd managed to skip past the spooky window of the understair larder, as that one had an uneasy feeling to it as well, and I went to walk upstairs to my room. We had a double landing in this stairway because it was a bit of a bigger house. As I was climbing the stairs and reached the first landing, I heard a creak upstairs. Right, okay. All of a sudden, my brain just went, "There's somebody looking at you from the top landing." And there was a real feeling of, "Don't look up." Of course, being me, I started looking around, and just out of the corner of my eye, I saw this hand over the banister. But I couldn't make it out to be a solid hand. Yeah, no, goodbye. You would find me down at the pub until my mates had clocked off and they were back at home with me. Yeah. I walked back downstairs, backwards, as I didn't want to turn around and make eye contact with anything. I went into the kitchen where I felt a bit better, so I said to myself, right, let's do this again. So I went back to the stairs, and again, once I got to the first landing, I had that same feeling again. Don't look up. There's this awful presence. So I made my way back down to the kitchen yet again, and had this overwhelming sense of fear just wash over me. My brain just said, arm yourself. So I grabbed a knife and readied myself to go up the stairs. I just wanted to go up to my bedroom, do what I needed to do. I mean, yeah, dealing with ghost shenanigans when you've just got off work and the last thing you want to be doing is anything sort of mentally taxing and a nasty ghost is blocking your way. Yeah, totally understand. I got to the bottom of the stairs and started climbing, one stair at a time, when for the third time the alarms in my head said, "Don't look up." I just froze at the bottom of the stairs. My friends came home at 1 a.m. and I'd been stuck at the bottom of the stairs since 8 p.m, completely unable to move. The thing was, another one of my mates who shared that house was found in a similar position a year ago, crouched at the bottom of the stairs. He was absolutely terrified, but he never spoke of it and would become aggressive if anyone asked. So to me and Samantha, there is definitely something going on with that street. Bourne has a lot of deep history, dating back to the Romans and Hereward the Wake. He was a man who led rebellions against the Normans. He was from Bourne. It always made me wonder if they just built the houses on top of something, as back when they were built, there would have been no requirement to do an archaeology report like nowadays. But those two experiences in two houses on the same street, they definitely felt connected to the area. Being away from that house I shared with my family is a happy ending for anyone who has experienced it. We're back in Scotland, now living the happy ending. Although this house is also haunted, the ghost likes to play with the bin lids in the kitchen. So he can stay, he's pretty harmless, because if he goes, we don't know what might take his place. I just have to say an absolutely massive thank you to Paul and Samantha for sharing their story. They had never told that story to anyone outside of the family before, and so I am beyond grateful to them both for trusting me with this account. And this all came together through multiple emails and a long phone call, and it was very clear from both of them that this was the worst thing that they had ever experienced. They'd had brushes with the paranormal in the past and since then too, but this was something that deeply affected them. I mean, to the point where you're walking that road and you don't even want to look at the house. And even Paul mentioned that he was getting sick to his stomach just reliving everything that happened in that house on our call. And that just really stuck with me. I've kept everyone else anonymized and even the house too, because this wasn't just a spooky story to tell. So thank you again, Paul and Samantha, for sharing this with me. And if you have a story about something unexplained that happened to you that you'd like to share, please do pop me an email to hello@don'tscareclaire.com, or even better, use the form pinned in the comments. I would really love to hear from you. And please don't worry if you feel like you're going on too long. Tell me all of the things, the whole story. But if you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like. And if you haven't already, it would be so great if you were subscribed to me too. But anyway, that is all from me today. Next week, we are back down in Cornwall for the concluding part of the ghosts lingering around Bodmin in jail. So make sure you stay hydrated, keep drinking that water. I cannot wait to chat with you more about the morbid, mysterious and macabre. So until next time, sleep safe. Was 6 p.m. a good time to start recording? I don't feel like it was, as the dogs are upstairs. I can hear them going round and round in circles waiting for Mr. DSC to get up so that he will go feed them. And the cats are just being cats near dinner time. But why make things easy? Easy's boring.